I've helped solve more than a few cases looking at someone's language. This case is just so unusual and so different than other cases we've seen, especially because almost 3 months later, it remains unsolved. I can't help but think that the only thing that I keep coming back to is somehow this involves Savannah Guthrie, the TV personality, but something to do with her profession, something to do with someone who she's been in touch with over the years.
3 months, no suspect, no confirmed sighting, no single explanation that fully connects every piece left behind. Tens of thousands of tips processed by investigators, and still the case sits without a breakthrough. A reward that has climbed past $1.2 million, untouched, unanswered, as if the truth is just out of reach but never fully visible. On the surface, it looks like momentum has stalled, like every lead has already been chased down and exhausted. But on April 30th, something shifted. Two former FBI profilers, men who built their careers understanding how offenders think before they act, spoke publicly about this case. And what they revealed did not support the narrative everyone had been following. Challenged it completely, because according to them, the entire premise behind this investigation may be wrong. The motive, the target, the reason this happened in the first place. If this is your first time here, welcome to Court of Secrets, where we reconstruct the moments before everything changed. And if you have been following closely, what you are about to hear reframes everything you thought you understood. Stay with me until the end.
Hey, that's a key point, so let's hammer that home. So over the weekend, Savannah Guthrie and her family said, "We will pay." That was on Saturday, so that if they then paid on Saturday, that would start the clock. We're now past 12-hour mark, and you say that Bitcoin account, there is no money inserted. For a lot of people that don't really understand Bitcoin or how that works, can you give a little context into that?
Maybe a little. I'm not an expert in this, but you can see, it's visible what people deposit if you have the link, which we do. What is not visible is who gets the money. And from what I understand, that's virtually impossible, if not impossible, to figure out, which is why somebody like this would use Bitcoin.
And of course, it is possible there's another account, or maybe they contacted them separately. We just don't know that. There's no indication, though, that has happened.
It doesn't feel like they are having direct contact with law enforcement or with the Guthrie family. They have been doing this through local media and us.
And I think you've got about as good of a gut feeling as anybody in all of media, and also law enforcement. What do you think's really going on here?
I am being careful here because I can't say. I can't say because there are things I'm thinking that I don't want to say out loud because I don't know them to be true, and there would be consequences if I did. And I think a lot of people have theories, and I have theories. I am confused about this whole ransom situation, that if somebody took the care to try and get this kind of money, to make it appear as if this is a kidnapping for ransom, why didn't it happen?
For 3 months, the narrative surrounding this case has followed a single direction. Money. Every public assumption, every early theory, every discussion that unfolded across media and online spaces traced back to one central idea, that this was a calculated attempt to extract financial gain. The Bitcoin demands reinforced that belief. The structure of the messages reinforced it. Even the timing suggested someone who understood leverage, pressure, and negotiation. It looked like a transaction waiting to be completed. And for a while, that explanation held. But there was always something beneath it that did not fully align. Something that felt constructed, but not in the way a financial crime is usually constructed. Because when money is the motive, clarity follows. Communication is direct. Instructions are precise. And above all, the objective remains consistent from beginning to end. That consistency never fully appeared here. In the previous stage of this investigation, attention was placed on two critical developments. The first was the indication that federal authorities were not simply reacting, but building toward something structured, something prosecutable. The second was the growing realization that the digital trail, the very thing that seemed central, was not behaving like a real ransom channel. Those two elements did not just raise questions. They began to shift the foundation of the case itself. And once that shift began, a different kind of question emerged. Not what was demanded, but why it was constructed this way at all. Because if the financial layer was not genuine, then it was serving another purpose. A distraction, cover, a narrative designed to pull attention in the wrong direction long enough for something else to remain unseen. That answer did not come from data recovery or forensic tracing. Came from interpretation, from behavioral analysis, from individuals who spent decades examining the patterns that exist before crimes become visible. What they identified was not randomness. It was direction, and that direction pointed away from money entirely. What they suggested changes the center of this case completely. The focus was never the victim in isolation. The focus was connection, access, proximity to someone else. And once that becomes clear, every detail that previously seemed confusing begins to reorganize itself into something far more deliberate and far more personal. What emerges from that perspective is not a sudden act, but a progression. Not a moment, but a timeline that extends far beyond the night everything became visible. Because behavior like this does not begin with action. It begins quietly, observation without interaction, awareness without detection.
They're really at a lot of dead ends behind the scenes, still going through leads. Thousands and thousands of tips have come in, which they haven't gone through all of them yet, so you can't call it a cold case. Since I last talked to you, I've been interviewing all these retired FBI profilers. There's this behavioral analysis unit where they try to figure out who a suspect is. And I'm kind of curious what you think about some of their theories since you're local. You have an idea of the actual area.
Yeah.
Most of them have seemed to agree that they think it's someone just statistically who knew Nancy, not necessarily like a family member or a friend, but someone who had some kind of contact with her, whether it be like a contractor or just anybody, but not a total stranger. What do you think about that?
They're the experts at that, and I would not disagree with that, especially if multiple profilers have pushed that out. I've always thought it was someone who was focused on her for whatever reason, whether it was they knew her, knew of Savannah, one of those things, but that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Do you think, and this is another thing they brought up, that it could not even be a ransom, that could have all just been sort of a cover-up?
I think so.
Do you think that?
I do, because when you talk about a single Bitcoin, a half of a Bitcoin, that's not normal for someone who's they're gonna ask for $10 million. That's kind of just how I think that would work. And I think that something happened early on with Nancy, and that was a part of their pivot. Let's throw that out there to try and get these folks off our scent, our trail, or whatever it might be, and just move on from there.
A presence that exists on the edge of someone's life without ever crossing into it in a way that raises immediate concern. Over time, that distance begins to close. The behavior shifts. Attempts are made, small at first, almost insignificant. A message that feels out of place. A pattern that repeats just enough to be noticed but not enough to be reported. These are the early indicators, the moments that rarely carry weight until something forces them into focus later. This is where the structure of the crime begins to make more sense. Because if the objective was not financial, then the absence of certain expected elements becomes critical. There was no immediate communication left behind at the point of entry. No clear initiation of a transaction. Nothing that would normally define the beginning of a ransom process. That absence is not an oversight. It is a signal. What followed instead was noise. Messages that appeared disconnected from the origin point. Communications that lacked consistency. And when examined closely, they do not align with a single controlled source. They resemble interference. Individuals inserting themselves into a situation that had already gained attention, creating layers that complicate rather than clarify. The real behavior sits underneath that noise, and it reflects planning, but not for negotiation. Planning for execution and aftermath. The kind of preparation that anticipates response, that accounts for investigation, that understands how to move without leaving something easily traceable behind. That level of awareness does not develop overnight. It suggests time, repetition, familiarity with patterns of response. And most importantly, it suggests that the person responsible was not reacting to an opportunity. They were following a path that had been forming long before anyone realized it existed. Once that is understood, the direction of the investigation narrows. Not outward into the public, but inward toward a smaller environment.
He saw very clearly right away what this was. And even on the phone, when I called him, he knew.
He knew.
And he said, I think she's been kidnapped for ransom. And I said,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Well, why? What? And then, I mean, it sounds so like, how dumb could I be? But I didn't want to believe. I just said, do you think because of me? And he said, I'm sorry, sweetie, but yeah, maybe. But I knew that.
You did.
I hope not. I mean, we still don't know. Honestly, we don't know anything.
No.
We don't know anything. So I don't know
Yeah.
that it's because she's my mom and somebody thought, oh, that girl, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck. I mean, that would make sense, but we don't know. But yeah, that's probably, which is too much to bear. To think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me.
A space where contact existed, even if it was not recognized for what it was at the time. That smaller environment is where the weight of this case now rests. Because when thousands of tips fail to produce a result, it is not always because the answer is hidden. Sometimes it is because the answer is too close, too specific, and buried within details that were never considered significant enough to examine twice. If the behavioral assessment holds, then the connection was already made at some point in the past. Not necessarily acknowledged, not necessarily remembered with clarity, but recorded somewhere. A message, a comment, a repeated attempt at contact that stood out just enough to be noticed and then dismissed. Those are the fragments that matter now. And within those fragments, there is likely a pattern. Not obvious at first glance, but consistent when viewed over time. Presence that returns. A tone that shifts. An escalation that moves gradually from passive interest to something more focused, more directed. That pattern is not random. It is constructed through repetition. This is also where proximity becomes important, because knowledge of routine, of location, of personal environment does not come from a distance alone. It requires attention over time. It requires access to information that is not immediately visible to the general public. And that level of familiarity places the individual within a defined range, geographically, socially, or digitally. There is also another layer to consider. The visible element of the crime may not represent the entirety of it. The individual seen may not be the one who initiated it. The behavior suggests coordination at some level, whether direct or indirect. Someone acting and someone directing. Someone visible and someone remaining outside of that visibility. That distinction matters because it expands the framework without losing focus. It reinforces the idea that what appears on the surface is only part of the structure. And the rest exists in decisions that were made long before the moment anything was captured. At this stage, the investigation is no longer searching for a random break. It is moving toward alignment, toward the point where one overlooked detail connects with another and forms a complete picture that was always present, but never fully assembled until now. The case has not gone cold. The timeline has not ended. And the truth, whether recognized or not, still exists in the world outside this investigation. If anything you have heard here aligns with something you remember, a conversation that felt unusual, a person whose behavior changed in subtle but consistent ways, or someone who showed a level of interest that did not feel normal, that detail matters more than you think. Investigators are still receiving information. They are still reviewing connections. And the difference between silence and resolution often comes down to one person deciding that what they noticed is worth reporting. There is a standing reward of over $1.2 million, and it remains untouched. Not because the answer is impossible to find, but because the right piece has not yet been placed in front of the right eyes. If there is something in your memory that has stayed with you since this began, now is the moment to act on it. Weeks ago, a routine evening ended without warning. A return home that should have been ordinary became the last confirmed moment before everything changed. No signs of disruption left behind in a way that clearly explained what happened next. Just absence. And somewhere within that absence, a sequence of decisions made by someone who had been moving toward that moment long before it arrived. The emerging perspective from behavioral analysis suggests this was never random. It was directed, focused, built over time with a specific outcome in mind that extended beyond what was immediately visible. And the person at the center of it may not exist on the surface of this case at all, but within the patterns that have yet to be fully connected. Investigators believe those patterns exist. They believe they have been documented in some form, whether in communication, observation, or memory. And when they are aligned correctly, the picture will not appear new. It will feel familiar, as if it had always been there, waiting to be understood. The case remains active. The silence remains unbroken. But silence does not last forever under pressure. If this video has brought you closer to understanding what may be happening here, consider subscribing to Court of Secrets. Every report we produce follows the same standard, grounded, verified, and built only on what can be supported. We will continue to follow this case until the moment clarity replaces uncertainty. And based on everything examined so far, that moment may arrive sooner than expected.